December 17th, 1944. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The air was thick with powder smoke and pine sap. Snow, churned to brown slush by tank treads and boots, covered the forest floor. Corporal Ernst Vogel of the Wehrmacht crouched behind a splintered tree trunk, clutching his Mauser rifle with numb fingers. Around him, the last remnants of his unit, what had once been a platoon, were surrendering. The crack of distant rifles faded into silence. Then came the voices. English, calm, confident, practiced. "Hands up, drop it. You're done." Vogel's weapon slipped from his grasp. He raised his hands, heart hammering, eyes fixed on the Americans emerging through the haze. Figures in snow-dusted uniforms, M1 rifles at the ready. Their helmets gleamed dull beneath the weak winter sun. Within minutes, the Germans were disarmed and herded toward a nearby road. To Vogel's surprise, their captors didn't look like the industrial slaves the Reich's propaganda had promised. The Americans were clean-shaven, well-fed, joking among themselves. One of them, tall, broad-shouldered, with a cigarette dangling from his lip, grinned as he tossed a captured German helmet to a buddy. The prisoners were marched past a row of Sherman tanks idling in the snow. Their engines rumbled like beasts at rest. The smell of exhaust mixed with the bitter cold. A young GI with grease stains on his jacket shouted, "Hey, get these krauts some chow." An hour later, Vogel sat on the frozen ground beside a supply truck. An American sergeant opened a crate marked U.S. Army Ration, Type K. He tossed each prisoner a small cardboard box sealed with wax paper. Vogel eyed it warily. Inside, he found a can of luncheon meat, a packet of crackers, a chocolate bar, instant coffee, a tiny pack of cigarettes, a stick of chewing gum, and a packet of sugar. There was even a folded piece of toilet paper and a matchbook. The German soldiers stared in disbelief. "Zigaretten?" one muttered. "Und Schokolade?" another added, his voice half awe, half resentment. Vogel tore open the chocolate bar. It was sweet, rich, almost luxurious. He hadn't tasted anything like it in months. He bit again, slower this time, letting it melt on his tongue. Around him, other prisoners were doing the same, eating as if unsure whether to laugh or curse. One whispered, "This is their field food?" The American sergeant, watching them, smirked. "Not bad, huh? We call them K-rations. Got everything a guy needs?" He lit a cigarette, took a drag, and added, "Hell, it ain't steak, but it'll keep you walking." Vogel looked down at the little box in his lap. Compact, efficient, neatly organized. Even in captivity, he couldn't help comparing it to the rations he'd carried into battle. Hard black bread, a smear of fat, maybe a can of ersatz meat if he was lucky. The contrast was brutal. That night, as he sat in a makeshift POW tent, he held the empty wrapper of the chocolate bar like a relic. In that small square of sugar and foil, he saw something terrifying, something the Reich had never prepared him for. This wasn't just food, it was power. 2 days later, the captured soldiers were moved to an American rear camp outside Spa, Belgium. The war still thundered beyond the horizon, the distant echoes of artillery rolling like approaching storms. But here, behind the lines, there was order. Trucks moved in steady convoys, tents stood in perfect rows, and somewhere nearby, a field kitchen hissed with the smell of bacon and coffee. Corporal Vogel sat on a wooden crate, watching a group of American quartermasters unloading supplies from a train. It was like nothing he'd ever seen. Crates stamped U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps stretched as far as the eye could see. Flour, canned meat, chocolate, coffee, sugar, an ocean of abundance. One of the guards, a freckled private named Miller, noticed Vogel's stare. "You guys hungry again?" he asked, half joking. Vogel hesitated before answering. How? How do you feed so many? Miller shrugged. We don't run out. Not since Mr. Ford and Mr. Kaiser got to work. He smiled. Factories, trains, ships. It all runs like clockwork. For Vogel, it was incomprehensible. In the Reich, everything was rationed. Gasoline, butter, even bread. At the front, soldiers boiled horse meat or ate stale loaves dipped in river water. Here, the Americans seemed to eat like civilians, even at war. That afternoon, the prisoners were issued another K-ration. This one labeled Lunch Unit. Inside, cheese spread, biscuits, powdered lemonade, a small can of ham, more cigarettes, more gum. Everything neatly packed, every detail thought of. The German sergeant beside Vogel muttered, "They go to war with a picnic basket." Vogel turned the can in his hands. It was small, efficient, indestructible. Printed on the side, packed by H.J. Heinz Company, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He had heard of Heinz once, before the war, when American products were rare luxuries in German shops. To see that name now, stamped on an army ration, filled him with a kind of dread. He realized that this little can represented something larger, a nation that had harnessed its entire industrial machine not just for destruction, but for sustenance. Later, as the POWs ate, a rumor spread through the camp. One of the American interpreters, a German-speaking sergeant from Chicago, was explaining to a group of curious prisoners how the system worked. "Every soldier gets 3 of those a day," he said, pointing to the K-ration boxes. "Breakfast, lunch, dinner. Doesn't matter if you're in a foxhole or flying a bomber." The prisoners murmured among themselves. 3 a day? For everyone?" "Yep," the sergeant replied. "And if he wants more, there's the mess halls, the Red Cross parcels, the PX." It was too much to comprehend. Vogel's friend, a corporal named Dietrich, leaned close and whispered, "Now I understand how they fight like that. They don't march on slogans, they march on calories." That night, lying on his cot beneath the cold Belgian sky, Vogel stared upward. He could hear the faint laughter of American soldiers by their trucks, the hiss of stoves heating coffee, the hum of a generator that powered lights all through the camp. He thought about the Reich's radio speeches, Goebbels' promises of final victory, the endless talk of will and sacrifice. But what he saw here wasn't sacrifice. It was abundance, efficiency, confidence built from full stomachs and full factories. He closed his eyes and muttered, "They're not stronger because they're better soldiers. They're stronger because they never go hungry." And in that quiet realization, a new kind of fear crept into him. Because for the first time, Corporal Ernst Vogel understood that Germany hadn't just lost the war of weapons. It had lost the war of hunger. March 1945. Somewhere in Western Germany, the snow had melted into gray slush, and the war, what was left of it, was unraveling like a torn flag. German towns lay in ruins, their church spires shattered, their streets littered with abandoned helmets and twisted bicycles. The Wehrmacht, once the pride of Europe, now moved like a ghost army, hungry, exhausted, and hollow-eyed. In a makeshift command post north of Remagen, a group of German officers sat huddled around a wooden table. A captured American supply crate sat in front of them. The stenciled letters on its side read, U.S. Army Field Rations, Class C and K. Oberleutnant Franz Reiner flicked open his knife and pried it open. Inside were dozens of neat brown boxes, each identical, each labeled with date stamps and caloric content. He lifted one carefully, as though handling contraband gold. "Monstrous," he muttered. "Every soldier gets this? Every single one?" Another officer, gaunt and pale, leaned forward. "We have men who haven't eaten in 2 days. Some boil grass. Some scrape frozen potatoes from the mud. And the Americans, They send chocolate to the front. Reiner peeled back the wax paper of a K-ration marked dinner unit. The smell of canned meat filled the room. He turned the label over and read aloud. Processed cheese, biscuits, beverage powder, cigarettes, candy bar. He laughed bitterly. This isn't a ration, he said. It's a banquet. A sergeant sitting nearby, his face gray with fatigue, whispered, My son starves in Dresden, but their soldiers eat better than our officers. Reiner took a slow bite from the biscuit. It was dry, but the flavor, salty, rich, unmistakably real, carried an emotional weight that none of them could ignore. He set it down, staring at it as if it were evidence in a trial. This, he said finally, is how they win. Across Europe, similar scenes unfolded. German POWs captured during the Ruhr campaign or the fall of the Rhineland were astonished, not by American weapons, but by their food. Some begged for K-rations instead of bread. Others collected the wrappers, turning them over in disbelief. The chocolate, the canned meat, the instant coffee. These became symbols of something far greater than logistics. The Americans weren't just feeding their men. They were feeding an empire of confidence. In one POW camp near Koblenz, a captured German quartermaster, formerly responsible for supplying an entire regiment, examined a U.S. Army food crate for hours. He couldn't believe how standardized it was. Every box identical, every calorie calculated, every soldier fed as though his life mattered equally. He muttered to himself, They've turned war into industry. We've turned it into starvation. The camp guards, amused, would sometimes trade cigarettes for Wehrmacht bread or tins of ersatz coffee. The Germans always made the same comment. Yours tastes like peace. Meanwhile, on the front lines, GIs tore open their own rations, cursing the same boxes that their enemies revered. They joked about the powdered eggs, the tinny cheese, the endless cigarettes. But they ate every day without fail. Private Joe Marston of the 9th Infantry Division once wrote home, The K-rations ain't fancy, Ma, but they keep us marching. I guess the Jerrys don't have much left. They look at my chocolate bar like it's treasure. He didn't know how right he was. For the Germans, the K-ration became a quiet humiliation. A cardboard box that spoke louder than any speech. It wasn't just about food. It was about a nation's ability to never go hungry again. Reiner, once proud of Germany's scientific war machine, realized the truth that night as he sat in the candlelight, chewing the last of the American cheese spread. The Americans, he whispered to himself, fight with factories. We fight with prayers. And as the candle burned low, its wax dripping over the edge of the table, he knew which of those would last longer. April 1945. Somewhere along the Rhine, the war was collapsing in on itself. Bridges were falling, units were dissolving, and towns surrendered before a single shot was fired. The Third Reich, the once terrifying machine of conquest, had been outbuilt, outfed, outlasted. American supply convoys rolled through the mud and ruins like rivers of iron. Each jeep, each half-track, each truck groaned under the weight of crates. Ammunition, fuel, blankets, and always food. The olive-drab boxes marked Ration K and Ration C seemed endless, stacked in pyramids on the roadside, dropped by parachute into captured towns, even handed out to liberated civilians. To the defeated Germans who watched them pass, the sight bordered on the unreal. They had been told that America was decadent, soft, a country of jazz, chewing gum, and excess. But as the convoys thundered past, mile after mile of food and fuel and cigarettes, that propaganda dissolved like frost in sunlight. One old farmer, watching from his ruined field near Remagen, murmured to a passing U.S. soldier, Ihr habt mehr Brot als wir Menschen. You have more bread than we have people." The soldier just smiled, tossed him a can of Spam, and kept walking. In the American command post at Koblenz, Captain Charles Ellsworth of the Quartermaster Corps was recording figures. His pencil danced across a clipboard, his voice calm, almost detached. Rations delivered to 12th Army Group, 1,342,000. Replacement stock en route from Le Havre. Waste margin, under 1%. To Ellsworth, it was numbers. To history, it was revolution. Behind him, a sergeant unpacked a crate of fresh rations. Inside each, canned ham, biscuits, powdered soup, fruit bars, gum, chocolate, coffee, sugar, cigarettes, even a packet of salt tablets for hot climates. It wasn't luxury. It was design. Precise, methodical, efficient. Each K-ration contained about 3,000 calories, engineered to fit in a soldier's pocket and survive any climate. They could be dropped from planes, carried through jungles, or stuffed into a tank's storage compartment. That efficiency had a name. Victory through logistics. Henry Stimson, the U.S. Secretary of War, once said, "You can't fight without food, and you can't win without speed." The K-ration was both. German POWs assigned to unload supply trains at captured depots soon discovered what that meant. One of them, a young mechanic named Otto Brenner, later recalled, "The Americans had food for every man, even their prisoners. We carried crate after crate, and when we opened them, each one was full. It was not chaos. It was precision. It was like they had built a factory just for hunger." He wasn't wrong. In Chicago, New Jersey, and Baltimore, entire production lines existed solely for military food. Women in hairnets filled cans with luncheon meat at Armour and Company. Assembly lines rolled out biscuits by the ton. Chocolate flowed from the Hershey plant, which had been ordered to produce 24 million ration bars per week. Back in Germany, an army of workers and civilians had spent months scavenging for potatoes. In America, a single factory could feed an army division every day. That was the real miracle of the war. Not the atomic bomb, not the tanks. It was the quiet, unstoppable rhythm of production. The endless hum of machines that turned grain into power, steel into victory, hunger into history. In one small POW camp near Mainz, Corporal Ernst Vogel once again found himself holding a K-ration box. This time as a worker, not a prisoner of battle. He sat on a stack of them in the shade of a supply truck, the cardboard warm from the sun. He turned it over slowly, tracing the printed words with a dirty finger. Packed by General Foods Corporation, New York. He couldn't help but think of what that meant. That somewhere, thousands of kilometers away, people he would never meet had built this box for someone like him. That the American soldier on the Rhine ate food made by hands in Chicago, by machines powered by rivers, by a system so vast it defied imagination. And in that moment, he understood what Germany had truly lost. It hadn't lost to a single army. It had lost to a nation that could feed the world, even while conquering it. May 1945. Bavaria. The war was over. The guns had fallen silent, and the Reich lay broken. Cities hollowed, railways twisted, and the countryside stripped bare. Fields once green with wheat were now littered with craters and tank husks. In the ruins of Nuremberg and Cologne, children scoured the rubble for food, their hands blackened with soot, their eyes too old for their faces. And then came the Americans. Their convoys arrived like moving storehouses. Trucks loaded with crates stamped U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps, jeeps towing trailers full of supplies. Soldiers tossed cans to children, handed chocolate to women, and set up makeshift kitchens in the squares of bombed-out towns. To the hungry, it looked like magic. To the Americans, it was routine. Everywhere they went, the same boxes appeared. K-rations, C-rations, D-bars. The same labels, the same efficiency. And soon, something strange began to happen. The defeated started to study their conqueror's food. At a POW camp near Augsburg, a group of captured German officers gathered around a wooden table. Before them lay an opened American K-ration. It had been dissected like a specimen. Each component laid out in perfect order: canned meat, crackers, gum, instant coffee, sugar tablets, cigarettes. Colonel Weber, once a supply officer in the Wehrmacht's 6th Army, stared at it silently for a long time. Then he said, almost reverently, This is how they win wars." His adjutant frowned. "With food, with systems," Weber replied. "This isn't lunch. This is organization made edible." He picked up a small packet of soluble coffee and turned it over in his hand. "Every soldier drinks the same, eats the same, moves the same. No shortages, no improvisation. It's all planned. Even this small piece of sugar is counted." The adjutant nodded slowly, realizing it was true. The K-ration wasn't luxury, it was equality. Every American soldier, from a general to a private, could unwrap the same box and find the same meal. It was, in its own way, democracy in a tin. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the machinery of plenty still roared. The Hershey factory in Pennsylvania had produced over 3 billion chocolate bars during the war. Each one designed not for taste, but for endurance. Kellogg's, Nabisco, Heinz, and General Foods had all transformed their civilian industries into engines of war feeding. One assembly line in Battle Creek could fill 250,000 ration boxes in a single shift. Another in Chicago turned out 30,000 cans of Spam every hour. The same Spam that now lined the supply shelves from the Ardennes to Okinawa. The genius wasn't just the scale. It was the reliability. Every truck that left an American depot could be tracked, timed, and resupplied before it was even empty. Every soldier could expect breakfast, lunch, and dinner, even in the middle of a blizzard or a jungle. The Germans had relied on foraging, improvisation, and local seizure. The Americans had replaced hunger with mathematics, and in that simple truth lay the difference between survival and starvation. For the POWs, this realization grew heavier with each passing week. The rations that once seemed strange or decadent became familiar, even comforting. One afternoon, Corporal Ernst Vogel, his uniform now ragged, his belt taken, his pride threadbare, sat beneath a tree with a K-ration balanced on his knees. The box was sun-faded, the corners soft, but its contents were still perfect. He unwrapped the chocolate bar slowly, almost ceremoniously, and broke it in half. He handed the other piece to Dietrich, the friend who had marched beside him since Normandy. The two men ate in silence, the sound of distant laughter from American soldiers drifting through the camp. After a moment, Dietrich said quietly, "Do you remember when they told us the Americans were weak? That they had no discipline, no hunger?" Vogel nodded. "Yes." Dietrich laughed once, a hollow sound. "They were right about one thing," he said. "They have no hunger." The two men sat for a long time, staring at the horizon that now belonged to someone else. A month later, when Vogel was transferred to a reconstruction camp, he was allowed to keep one souvenir. He chose a single empty K-ration box. He flattened it carefully, folding it into his coat pocket. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Because to him, it wasn't just cardboard. It was the symbol of a world where victory came not from will or brutality, but from the quiet, relentless power to feed every man who fought for you. And as he boarded the truck that would carry him home to the ruins of a defeated empire, he whispered, half to himself, "Whoever feeds the soldier feeds the future." In the post-war years, The legacy of the K-ration would spread far beyond the battlefield. Its design inspired humanitarian relief packages, school lunch programs, even early versions of spaceflight food. But its meaning remained the same. It was proof, small, compact, undeniable, that in the greatest war mankind had ever waged, victory did not belong to the army with the strongest will. It belonged to the army that never went hungry.